Hey guys, you're watching Soundwaves TV. Chasta and Dennis here with an old pal to you and you guys, and a new pal to me.
Absolutely.
Steve Wagner's on the set. How
you
cool
doing,
is
buddy?
this?
Doing fantastic. It's so great to be here. It's lovely to finally meet you.
So
I've
nice to
been a
meet you.
huge fan for quite a while.
Thank you.
This is so weird. It's like all my worlds coming together right now because Steve and I, we produced movie TV back in the 90s.
Yes, indeed.
Before it was fashionable
That's
to do
correct.
so. We did it the
yes.
hard way.
The younger, hipper San Francisco Siskel and Ebert.
Exactly. Exactly.
that.
How'd that pitch work out? We're talking about music now. That should tell you how it worked out. Before we start, I want to say I am so damn proud of you because as long as I've known you, which is over a quarter century, the last 10 plus years of your life, you've been working on this magnum opus project that was, it was a mini documentary we did. You've gotten up in front of people to talk about this. You've given lectures, the whole thing. And now it's a book and it's called All You Need Is Myth, The Beatles and the Gods of Rock. Dude, people write books about jokes. People write books about simple things. You took on this Herculean topic, which, dare I say, recontextualizes not only the Beatles, but all of rock and roll. I know that's a little much, but...
That's the truth. That was well said. I want to hear it from your mouth. I want to hear like the elevator pitch, if you will.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I might just add, I thought this book was going to take a year to write. Right. It's like, I know my rock history and I studied mythology and literature and comparative religion. And, I'm going to be able to crank this out in a year. The fact that it took 10 years to write is due to the fact that this went way deeper than I expected it to. And the longer I wrote, the more I realized, I'm the one that kind of has to do this. And
right, because nobody else has taken this perspective.
I appreciate
That's what
that.
makes it so fascinating.
Well, it's it truly is, and it was in a very, very illuminating, educational experience for me to write it, and I hope that and believe that it will translate to the reader as well.
Yeah. Okay, so give us the elevator pitch. It says, revealing the hidden keys to the soundtrack of our time.
Well, I think one of the most basic things here is that when you study the history of mythology and world mythologies from around the world, it becomes clear very quickly that mythology always reinvents itself for each new culture, each new era, each new language. And I think that's very important because what we had in the 60s was this new language of mass media, this new language of recorded sound and image technology. Radio, television literally hit their strides, their peaks, right about the time that the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan. The timing of that was very, it was just absolutely perfect. We had gotten to the point where literally half of the country was able to tune in to the Ed Sullivan Show and all be focused on the same thing at the same time. And let's not forget, this is at the height of the baby boom. All of a sudden, 40% of the United States is under the age of 20.
Yeah.
Right.
That had never happened before. So what you've got a new era, you have this new culture, you have this new language. I dare say it's a no-brainer that mythology was going to sprout, was going to reinvent itself in this new milieu. And I believe that's exactly what we saw happen.
This is fascinating. I mean, diving into this, I'll be honest, like I would get into it and have to kind of go back and reread that because it is very, it's full of theology, obviously, and philosophy, and the comparisons that you make to these characters, of course, of the Beatles is fascinating. Explain kind of the archetype that's happening here with the dynamic and the members.
Well, with the Beatles, it's the hero archetype. We've maybe come to understand this concept of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell is probably the greatest mythologist of the 20th century. He wrote this very influential book in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And just to jump ahead a few decades, this was George Lucas's template for Star Wars. It basically tells a story where the hero departs his community, is initiated by obtaining a boon, usually knowledge or treasure, and then returns with that for the benefit of the community. We're drawn to this story. This psychologically goes to a very deep place. Now, another name for the hero, when you're talking about, say, comparative religion, you could call this character the savior, because we are a Christian culture, or primarily a Christian culture. I used that example because it's the example most people are familiar with when it comes to these sort of ancient, belief systems, these ancient religions, these ancient mythologies. And let's not forget, one man's religion is another man's mythology, and vice versa.
Right.
Depends where you're coming from. But I was very careful, because I was not writing this book to change people's beliefs. My opinions don't really exist in this book. I'm basically saying, isn't it interesting that the Beatles, when you look at their narrative, and you look at the symbols that are associated with the Beatles, and you're looking at these characters that they seem to resonate in popular culture, wow, we see analogs of that in ancient religions, ancient mythologies, and that got me thinking. Once I started landing on that, it led to this.
When Dennis
book.
first kind of gave me this pitch as to this story, and we were talking about Jesus Christ, which I'm a Christian, okay?
Sure.
So comparing in any way Jesus Christ to the Beatles, like my initial reaction was like, meh, like I'm gonna step it back there.
People have been having that reaction
Yeah.
since 1966.
But that was the same reaction.
You and John Lennon both had the
Exactly,
same.
yeah. But when, John Lennon said that they were more popular than Jesus himself, obviously that caused that same reaction.
Yeah.
But when I dug in, man, there are some amazing things. When you start breaking down, every little thing about the characters, and even, whenever Yoko came into play, and the dualities and all these different things, it's really fascinating how this all played out.
Absolutely.
And I found myself being like, okay, well, you got a point there, sir.
If I could jump in on that, what I found amazing, and again, because I'm a screenwriting guy, so like you look at a screenplay template and you go, okay, here's where Act 1 ends and what the hero has to do. And you can look at a million movies and go, yep, Luke just left the farm.
Right.
And you can identify that
Yes.
moment. What
Yes.
I found completely fascinating about this is once you lay out what the savior myth is,
Yes.
the birth, the death, the resurrection,
Yes.
you fold your arms a little bit and go, okay, well, how does that apply to the Beatles? And then
Exactly.
you lay it out for us how it applies to the Beatles. Maybe go into detail a little bit
Well,
about that.
it's sort of an overarching narrative, obviously,
Yeah.
and consider this. The death, and this is all metaphor. This
Of course.
is allegory.
Yeah.
This is, I'm not talking.
But when you follow it, it's theory.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's the same story.
Right.
The death of the Beatles was their retreat from live appearance. They stopped appearing live.
Right.
And for the 60s culture, that was sort of the equivalent of a metaphoric death of the Beatles. What's going to happen now? We'd never really seen a group or a popular musician continue to be culturally relevant and still creatively leading the pack without live appearance. So it was kind of a metaphoric death. Well, then what? Right then, the album Revolver. Well, this is the transfiguration. This is the initiation. This, we see this also in ancient mythologies where the hero or the savior disappears. They have to go through a serious trial, whether it's go to hell for 3 days before resurrecting or becoming a prisoner or something. There's some trial they have to go through. And for the Beatles, it's the album Revolver. All of a sudden, they're transforming from the Beatlemania Beatles into this new adult version. Even the title of the album, Revolver, just calls to mind so many implications about revolution and evolution and turning over and becoming something new. And then, of course, you have the resurrection in Sgt. Pepper. All of a sudden, they're a mythic band. They're this new thing. And the album cover is a perfect example. You've got the wax figures of the Beatles in their black and whites. It's like going from black and white to color. They're in these phosphorescent, bright suits. It's like they've resurrected as this new thing with this new sound. They're a mythical phenomenon, right? And that's kind of when they became something more than just the same entertainers. And then the ascension, where the hero or the savior ascends to heaven or becomes one with God or something along these lines. Well, the All You Need Is Love broadcast, it was the world's first global satellite broadcast. And what is happening? Their image and sound is soaring above the earth, seen by 400
Beaming out to
million
everyone.
people in 28 countries. And what are they doing? They're aligning themselves with the message of love. And that is the savior archetype.
Boom, drop the mic.
Right? I mean, it is fascinating.
Right? Yeah.
But that begs the question. Was this purposeful? Was it thought out? Was this a plan of action?
Valid question.
Right? That they thought ahead of time.
Yeah, it is a valid question. Absolutely not the case. We've seen some of the rock archetypes sort of understand what their role is, and sort of naturally, I think Dylan had a real idea that he sort of was a prophetic voice, and he would push that. John and Yoko certainly understood the power of their mythic figures, but they weren't doing this. This took me 10 years to research. They didn't have time to study this stuff. This is very organic. But also consider the fact that they're being fueled by this massive consumer media culture. We're literally putting our money, we're literally investing in the personalities that mean the most to us, that are showing us who we are. And so we're giving them this fuel to be that. And you can certainly see this in play when these artists decided to not be the archetype that people love them for. Just as a very quick example, Joni Mitchell, classic Earth Mother. These early songs, she's the Earth Mother goddess. She's writing these songs that are about nature and inner wisdom and the intuitive feminine voice, right? And boy, was everybody on her. She was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then she took this sharp left turn into jazz music. And the whole collective just went, whoop, nope. Stevie Nicks. There's the new goddess. There's the new maiden.
That's
There's
my
the Earth Mother.
Yeah.
And Stevie Nicks reigns for a few years. And then she kind of goes off of her path, and the culture goes, whoa, Madonna, the new sex fertility goddess. We've watched our culture pivot from these goddess characters for decades. This has been going on for a long time.
You know, it's funny, the comparison to musicians and gods, because I remember a very specific moment in
We
time.
call them rock gods.
We do, exactly.
That's a sign.
I remember standing at Lollapalooza in Chicago, and I was watching Metallica, and all of a sudden I looked up, and these screens were from the ground to, 30 feet in the air, right? And there were 4 of them. And they had each one of the members on each of them, and I went, they're portraying themselves, maybe not the members of Metallica, but whoever was shooting it, they're portraying them as rock gods. They're 30 feet tall. They're superheroes. They're mythological creatures. They're larger than life. Like, that to me is intentional.
Oh, of course, because it is becoming intentional now.
People are more aware of it.
Can you walk through a record store without going... You know,
I know all the facts, all the trivia.
Before we even rolled, we were like, "What about Prince? What about Bowie?
Yes.
What about?" And Janice is your.
So Janice is my spirit animal, and you do talk about a lot of them: Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. I mean, we can go through a lot of these. How do you feel about Janice? Tell us her story, her archetype.
Well, Janice is a classic shaman, a medium. That's really the more accurate term for what we call shaman. And obviously the conflation of shamanism with rock and roll it would be hugely cliche if it wasn't so accurate. But artists like Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Grace Slick.
I mean, Jimi Hendrix literally with the guitar, like,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, it was
exactly.
like a physical embodiment of that.
Hendrix is the magician archetype with the magic wand. The guitar is the magic wand.
Right.
Janis would be a female medium called an oracle. She was literally a channel. She was a medium. And the types of songs that she gravitated towards, Piece of My Heart, Ball and Chain, Down on Me, Work Me Lord, Cry Baby. She gravitated towards this material that is literally, describing the experience of the oracle. And they died very young. I mean, it's fascinating how it works out.
It's so fascinating.
Yes.
Okay, so
Right.
if you smoke, you might want to take a hit for this question because we're getting real deep now. So my question is, do you personally think that people who are born as these really strong archetypes,
Yes.
okay, are they just the universe, God, whatever, has picked them to go about this journey? Is this learned behavior?
Well,
Again,
certainly
choke it up. We're getting deep.
Right.
Yeah.
The classic rock mythology was very much a product of the evolution of media at its time. The big stars. It's not like there weren't enormous fan quakes before. We saw that with Rudy Valley and
Right.
Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, of course, Elvis Presley, and
Elvis,
since we've seen it with Prince and Madonna and Nirvana,
Kurt Cobain,
Eminem,
right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But the artists that came before the Beatles lacked the mass media in full transmission. And the artists that have come since that classic era have lacked, they could never be qualified as such groundbreaking media creators. The story of the Beatles is very tied to the rise of television, the rise of mass media. It was like they were growing in tandem, and things were moving way too quickly for them to really be thinking about these things. It's more that the collective, the collective unconscious, the masses, we need these things mirrored back to us because these are psychological aspects that all of us carry. We all carry around the child with us. We all carry around
We have pieces of all of these, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what you have in the center, this is classic Carl Jung psychology, in the center of all of these psychological archetypes is the archetype that he called the self. It's the balancing archetype. It's the archetype that represents our perfected idea. It's completely can include anything. That's the hero. That's the savior archetype. And that's the Beatles in the context of their time.
So what I find fascinating is my 3.5-year-old is totally attracted to and obsessed with Yellow Submarine. And he's 3.5.
Right.
Right. Is he getting any of this archetypal kind of stuff?
Well, it's like Rolling Stone magazine said, Yellow Submarine is the gateway drug that
Right.
introduces children and toddlers.
The truth.
But Yellow Submarine is almost the perfect example of what we're talking about here, because the Beatles really had next to nothing to do with that film. That was created by King Features, who were the company that produced the Beatle cartoons. They had less than 10 months to write, animate, and produce that film.
Jeez.
And so there wasn't hardly any time. All they could do was sort of come up with a fantasy story based loosely on the Beatles' historical narrative. And so what do we see? We see the Beatles leaving Liverpool, sailing across dangerous seas, battling monsters, going through this initiation underwater, until they finally rescue the good people of Pepperland from the Blue Meanies.
That's the plot of Star Wars.
It's the
Right.
it's the hero. It's the hero's journey.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the savior archetype.
Right.
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
And yet,
it
that's
works.
Exactly.
To be kind of cliche, it's the greatest story ever told.
Right.
And yet, what is the function now of Yellow Submarine? It's kind of like the illustrated Bible books that children read in Sunday school. It introduces them to the story of the Beatles through vibrant color and, again, the greatest story ever told. They're hooked. They get it. It's in their language, and it's based around these songs. That was also the marker that the writers had to work with. It's like, well, the Beatles said we could use any songs. Well, they land on these songs like All You Need Is Love and All Together Now. These are all the inclusive, bringing everyone together, which is the function of the hero, the savior archetype. It's the same thing over and over.
It all comes back to that. It's so fascinating. We could literally talk to him forever about it. It is so fascinating.
We'll turn the camera off and just keep going.
I know, right? Exactly. Cannot recommend this enough.
Before we just tell people to buy your book, I just want to say one more thing. We were talking about this off camera. Now think about, it's 2020 right now, but think about 6 years ago. What was the number one song 6 years ago? Happy.
Yeah.
Blurred Lines. Think about how long ago that was. Just think for just a second.
Feels like a blip of time, right?
Right?
Nothing.
That was the entire Beatles career from Ed Sullivan to the end.
To the breakup.
And we're still talking about this.
Yes.
In 2020.
Half a century later.
Holy Lord.
It feels like the Beatles' career was 50 years long.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
Their whole recording career was about 7.5 years.
Right. Insane.
Yeah, and they're still
incredible.
the hottest property in global show. I mean, they're right up there with Star Wars.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And
Sure.
globally, that's how ubiquitous and pervasive they still are. Kids still fall in love with them. Everybody, when you become a Beatle fan and you read the books and you read this story, I mean, it's just something we're all drawn to because it's such a it's a reflection of the best parts in us, the parts that are about love. That's what they symbolize.
I love that.
Very nice.
And so they deserve to be there
Yeah.
because we want love at the top of the charts.
We need more of that.
That's
Absolutely.
correct.
Every day. So that's why you should go buy this book.
Yes.
So where can people get this?
It's on Amazon. You can also get it at our website, www.allyouneedismyth.com.
Great title.
And I so appreciate it. It's been lovely talking with you guys.
Fascinating is the word. It's been
Absolutely.
fascinating on
Yes.
our end. I know
Yes.
we're not fascinating. I mean, you are. In this whole story.
Dude, come back anytime you're in town. You're heading back to the Midwest to...
Yes. Take care of my mom, look after her, but still got a footprint out here, and certainly this overarching conversation, like you and I've been doing with movies now for nearly 30 years, the conversation goes on.
It will continue to be continued.
I said it before. I'm proud of you, brother. Everybody go check out this book. It's a really incredible work of art and a true accomplishment, just unlocking this and then realizing... I'm the guy. I kind of have to do this now.
Thank you so much.
A lot of people don't hear their calling, and that's exactly what you're talking about, is people who step into myth.
Yes.
And if I may say so, you stepped into yours. This is incredible.
You're a hero for taking this on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really,
so nice to meet you.
You too, Shaz.
Thank you for being
It's
here.
wonderful to be with you guys.
And we'll be back.